thank you very much for being here. That doesn't work. No. Okay, yeah. So thank you very much. So the aim of this talk is going to discuss whether the idea that conscious states can be individuated by their subjectivity, namely conscious states are those states that are subjective, and the idea of selfless experiences are compatible. What do I mean by subjectivity? Well, it's again the idea that awareness in experience is subjective. So phenomenal information, the information that conscious states convey, is ideally expressed deploying the first person pronoun. So something along the lines of, I am in such and such a state, or such and such a state is presented to me. And what do I mean by selflessness? Again, this is the idea that there are experiences in which neither the subject, the self, or any part of the body seem to be constitutive of awareness and experience. And there seems to be a tension there. Here are some premises that my argumentation is going to need. So first of all, I need to clarify what do I mean by information. And what I mean by information is simply ways of constraining uncertainty. So if you don't know who won the match last night, you have an uncertainty, you know which of the two teams won the match, then you read the newspaper, and the information in the newspapers can resolve the uncertainty that you have. And for us, conscious experiences are a primary source of information. They convey certain information to their subjects in awareness, and such information can be true or false when I'm hallucinating or when I'm having a veridical experience. I am going to assume that it is possible for two individuals to have experiences with the same phenomenology. Sure, different theories will have different demands on the conditions that two systems have to satisfy for them to have experiences with exactly the same phenomenology, but hardly any theory will deny that. In the radical case, just think of two systems that are physical duplicates. And moreover, I'm going to assume that two experiences with the same phenomenology, with the same phenomenal character, two states that feel the same way, convey the same thing. This is what I'm going to call phenomenal information. So if you were to have exactly phenomenologically the experience that I'm having right now, we would be sharing some information. And I'm going to call this information phenomenal information. So sameness in phenomenology entails sameness in phenomenal information. So if we are to track the idea that phenomenal information concerns the subject, we can go back at the very least to Aristotle, who claimed that in perceiving the world, we are also perceive our own existence. It's typically associated with philosophers like Descartes, but also Locke and Berkeley. This idea of self-awareness was under attack by Hume, and we're going to say a few things about Hume, but nonetheless, it continues up to our days in the analytic tradition with these ideas of for-me-ness or the sense of mindness, and also in the phenomenological tradition. And the idea is that what the experience conveys, so when I'm looking at a cup of coffee, my experience does not merely convey that there is a cup of coffee, but rather that I am in some kind of relation with this cup. And this is where I'm going to be assumed. In this sense, phenomenal information is always subjective, and is the kind of information that is expressed deploying this first person pronoun. I'm going to use these kind of sentences, something like, I am in such and such a state. So if you think that my experience is directed to is informing me about the cup, something like seeing the cup. And if you think that the object is something internal to the head, then you change the relation, because what I'm interested in is this first person component. Or for example, you could say also that such and such quality is presented to me. And again, what I'm figuring out is this first person element. Now, why have some people thought that this is not the case? So one possible motivation is really being a skeptic on the whole idea of information being subjective. And here is Hume, who in reply to people like Descartes or Locke, there are some philosophers who imagine we are every moment intimately conscious of what we call ourselves. He says, for my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never catch myself at any time without a perception. I never can observe anything but the perception. What is he saying? Well, you're telling me that this information is telling me something about the self, but then I go to introspect and I cannot find this guy telling me about. And that might give you general reasons to doubt on the idea of subjectivity. This is like a skeptic position. But even if we accept that our ordinary experiences are like that, some people think that altered states of consciousness, like psychedelic experience, dreams, or meditative states, shows example of experiences where this first-person aspect dilutes or disappear. Here are some reports that point in this direction. So it was not 100%, but there was no sense of an object there running the show. Emptiness is the best word. I felt a sense of union with others. I experienced a decrease in my sense of self-importance. I felt at once with the universe. I experienced a disintegration of myself or ego, or I lost all sense of ego. So in this case, there seems to be a tension between the idea of subjectivity and, at the very least, these experiences we are considering. So in order to understand why I think that subjectivity and selflessness are compatible, we need to characterize this first-person information. How are we going to characterize? Well, by the way they constrain uncertainty. I'm going to defend that there are two ways of understanding information that we would express with the sentence, I am in such and such a state, but that nonetheless correspond to two different informations. So the first one, so this is the idea. So the sentence, I am in such and such a state, that intends to capture the phenomenal content, admits different readings corresponding to different informations. And I'm going to distinguish an indexical reading from a non-indexical or perspectival reading. The first way to understand the message, I am in such and such a state, would be that the first person element is an indexical expression that captures different subject in different contexts. So when Luis is having the experience, his experience would convey that Luis is in such and such a state. And when Marta is having the experience, her experience conveys in that Marta is in such and such a state. So we have a term that in different contexts gives you different pieces of information. However, when we are considering a piece of information as being subjective, what many have in mind is the idea that there is information that is not available to other minds, that is somehow private, okay? So this privileged information involves a mode of presentation or a manner of representation that is not available to others. And this is one idea that we can find, for example, in Frege, who thought that in first-person thought, everyone is presented to himself in a particular and primitive way in which she is presented to no one else. The important part is that this privileged indexical information is information about how the world is, even if they involve some kind of private mode of presentation. Because what I want to do is to contrast this indexical reading from a non-indexical, or what I call perspectival reading. According to this perspectival reading, information not only conveys how the world, the actual world is, the environment is, but our location in logical space within this environment. And this is something that I'm going to clarify. So whereas the possible world information, as it happens in the indexical case, is information that changes in content from one subject to the others, as we saw. So it reduces uncertainty about the distribution of properties in the world. It tells us how the universe is. And we can think of its content as a set of possible worlds. Perspectival information is information that changes in truth value from one subject to another. And it reduces uncertainty about the distribution of properties in the subject. It is telling us how one is. And its content is a set of possible individuals. I'm going to explain this as clear as I can with one example. Imagine that this map, what does is mapping our uncertainty. So all the uncertainty that we have is like, is about whether the world that we know that contains two individuals, namely Marta and Luis, and they can be either blue or, either blue or red. So this is how the world could be. It could be that they are both blue. It could be that one is blue and the other one is red, or the other way around, or that they are both red, okay? So this is mapping our state of uncertainty. Now I get a message, and I'm going to characterize how this message helped me to reduce the uncertainty. So consider the message, I am red, understood in the indexical manner when had by Luis. Well, we have seen that this corresponds to the message, Luis is red, and Luis is red, select these two possible alternatives, and it's correct or true if the actual world is indeed one of those worlds. Okay, this is possible world information. The same thing happens with M is blue. M is blue correspond to W1 and W2, and it's true if the actual world is one such that, so if the actual world is one of these two. Indeed, if we had these two pieces of information, we would know that the actual world is W2, okay? And now let me contrast this information with the non-indexical or perspectival reading. According to it, as I have mentioned, the content is a collection of individuals. In this case, the individuals that are red, so the message, I am red, would capture I4, the individual 4, the individual 5, the individual 7, and the individual 8. And it's correct if I am one of those individuals. The same thing we can say with I am Luis, which would correspond to the individual 2, individual 4, individual 6, and individual 8, or my neighbor is blue. What is important here is that we contrast these two pieces of information that in our ordinary language are expressed by the same sentence, but that they make different distinctions in the space of possibilities, the indexical and the non-indexical reading. As they constrain uncertainty in different ways, they are like really like two different pieces of information, okay? So the next step is then to argue that phenomenal information is perspectival, is the non-indexical kind. For that, we can start with this. So here are Marta and Luis. Marta and Luis are two subjects that satisfy whatever condition you require from this system to have experiences with the same phenomenology. Imagine that they are looking at a green apple, and what that experience conveys, we use the sentence, I am seeing a green apple. Wait a minute. We still need to understand how this sentence is to be understood. If we understand it in the indexical or in the non-indexical way, well, here's the argument. So Luis and Marta are individuals that can have experiences with the same phenomenology. Therefore, if there is sameness in phenomenology, then it's going to be sameness in phenomenal information. If they feel the same, then they have some information in common. Well, but if the information is the same, we should rule out the indexical reading, because the indexical reading would be that Luis is seeing a green apple in the case of Luis, and that Marta is seeing a green apple. Hence, the information cannot be the same. So representing a particular subject entity, the entity we take to be the reference of the first person pronoun cannot be a condition to gather the information. So the information of Marta does not say anything about Luis. So here is the idea. So we come back to the I, and this is the kind of things that tries to show that you need to take the particular entity away. Now, it can be the case that Marta's experience is veridical while Luis is not, while Luis is having an hallucination. So in this case, in the same world, we have a change in truth value, and that is what is phenomenal, what is perspectival information, the non-indexical information. It's information that changes in truth value within a world. So if this is correct, the right way to understand phenomenal information is in the perspectival manner. Okay, so now we know what the content is, we know how we are supposed to understand it, and how this is supposed to help us understanding the compatibility of subjectivity, the idea that information in experience is subjective, with the idea that some experiences are selfless. Let me begin with the case of Hume. Remember, Hume was saying, when I introspect, so the information is supposed to be first personal, but when I introspect, I don't find that guy. Well, we know the answer already. Once we understand correctly how the information is to be understood, there is no problem. And in order to see that, consider this case. Imagine that Luis and Marta are looking at an apple to the left of a computer from center location. So the experience that you are having right now, as I hold my cell phone, would represent Miguel to the left of a cell phone from your location. Okay? And that would be the case. But one is located in Mexico City, while the other is located in Bamberg. As they're having the same experience, they should have the same information. So neither Mexico City nor Bamberg should be part of this information. So we need, again, this perspectival reading. So it would be something like there is an apple to the left of a computer from here, setting the subjectivity aside, where the reading of here has to be perspectival. Now, if you consider the kind of experience that I'm having right now, when looking at me, this experience conveys that something is the case from a particular location. Now, can you please try to introspect the here-ness? Well, if you are like me, we fail to introspect this here-ness, okay? But we do not conclude that the experience does not concern a location. And the subject plays the same role in first-person representation, the se perspectival representation, that the location in these here representations. So human observation is right. But the conclusion that there is no self-awareness in experience doesn't follow, in the same sense as the conclusion that the description of the information as certain organization from here does not follow from the fact that we cannot introspect the here-ness. And what about altered states? Well, ego dissolution is reported when there is a loss or an alteration in the perceived characteristics of the entity which we identify ourselves. Changes in body, for example, or a sense of union with the universe, or a decrease of self-importance. But we have learned that such an entity does not necessarily enter phenomenal information. So neither the body nor the organism. So this is not an object that is part of the experience. And this does not mean that the experience is not adequately expressed by I am in such and such a state. So there is a mistake there. Likewise, when we experience a loss of sense of ego or a disintegration of self or emptiness, those experiences still convey that one is in a certain state. So it's a state still telling me how I am. So in what kind of state that I am one of those individuals in a certain state. In the most radical case, the case of emptiness, it does convey that I am in a state of a state that does not say any other thing, so that is empty, but it's telling me I can rule out the alternative, which is that I'm not in pain or that I'm not in pleasure. So it's still informative, and it's still informative about myself. So just to conclude, conscious states seem to be subjective. By that I mean that the information they convey, the phenomenal information, is expressed deploying the first-person pronoun. Moreover, some experience seem to be selfless. So that's what some people like Hume, or some plausible interpretation of what Hume is saying, goes along this line, this skepticism, the idea that there is no self or body to be found in introspection. We have seen that this is right, but this does not tell us anything against the claim on subjectivity. And the same thing with altered states. The self seems to dissolve in some experiences, but this entity, or the properties that the entity that would the first person pronoun would refer to, might change, even disappear completely, but does not show that the information experience is not first personal. So subjectivity and selflessness are compatible if phenomenal information is perspectival. And that's it. Thank you very much. Ya está.